Good evening. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed Agents of Change. I'm Alex Mullaney. I'm an adjunct faculty with City College of San Francisco's journalism department. And I would like to thank you for being here. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, California Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, and California Newsreels. I would like to introduce our moderator, City College of San Francisco Journalism Department Chair and founder of El Tecolote, San Francisco's bilingual neighborhood newspaper, Juan Gonzales. Juan, please take it away.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome all of you that are here, and there should be a very stimulating discussion, and we certainly will be willing to answer your questions and maybe hear some of the comments you might have. But let me just start out by introducing our guest panelists, and I distinguished guest panelists that I'm really glad to have be a part of. First of all, there's Frank R. Dawson, who is the former dean of the Center for Media and Design campus at Santa Monica College and chair of the Communications and Media Studies Department. He's also served for 6 years as an instructor in the Cosby program at University of Southern California that launched to provide opportunities for African American television and film writers. Mr. Dawson also began his TV broadcasting career at the CBS television network in Los Angeles, serving as a writer, producer of advertising and promotion, and then as television programming executive. As director of comedy series development at Universal Studios, Mr. Dawson also supervised development of network series concepts and pilot production. As director of current programming, he then served as Universal's production executive on the NBC drama series Miami Vice and The Insiders. Mr. Dawson was a producer of Travis Smiley's first television talk show pilot, The Ethnic Perspective, and most recently, of course, as you saw in the film, he was co-producer and director of Agents of Change. He was born in New York City. Mr. Dawson is a member of the Writers Guild of America. He earned his undergraduate degree from Cornell University and a Master's of Science degree in television and radio from Newhouse School at Syracuse University, where he has been inducted into the school's professional gallery of distinguished alumni. Our other guest today is Abby Ginzberg. Abby is a Peabody Award-winning director, has been producing compelling documentaries about race and social justice over 35 years. She also co-directed and co-produced the 2000 film that you just viewed this evening. But her most recent film, Barbara Lee, Speaking from Truth to Power, is a compelling film about Representative Barbara Lee, who represents Oakland and Berkeley. The film is streaming on Amazon Prime and will be on Stars in February. Among Ms. Ginzberg's other documentary accomplishments are Waging Change, produced in 2019, a documentary about the challenges faced by tippers servers forced to rely on their tips and the federal tip minimum wage of $2.13 per hour. It has been broadcast on public television in February and in March 2021. In 2016, Ms. Ginzberg produced And Then They Came for Us. And the film is about a connection between the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and the Muslim travel ban. And another film project she's been involved in a lot of film projects. Yeah. This is another one in 2015 was entitled Soft Vengeance, Albie Sash and the New South Africa. And it was award-winning. It got the 2015 Peabody Award and has been screened at various film festivals around the world and winning 4 audience awards as a result. And lastly, she has been the consulting producer in The Barber of Birmingham, which premiered in Sundance Film Festival in 2011 and was nominated for an Oscar in the short documentary category. It was directed by Robin Friede and Gail Dolgan. And currently she's a busy person, but she still finds time to be the president of the Berkeley Film Foundation that provides grants to East Bay filmmakers and to the tune of 1.5 million plus over the last
Total to
years.
over 10 years. So
Over 10 years, over 10 years. So quite a amount of money that they've been able to do. And lastly, and first and foremost, Dr. Ramona Tascoe. Dr. Tascoe is a graduate of San Francisco State University, where she was first to be arrested in the historic San Francisco State College strike and protests that strategically shut the campus down for about 5.5 months and led to the establishment of the Black Studies Department and the College of Ethnic Studies, which still exists today. Among her achievements, Dr. Tascoe is the recipient of the 1999 Jefferson Award presented at the US Supreme Court. She also is inducted in the San Francisco State Hall of Fame in 2015. And a 1979 graduate of the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine, Dr. Tascoe was more recently bestowed the 2020 Compassionate Physician Award. As a veteran first provider, Dr. Tascoe provided medical services throughout the world, such as in the 1998 US Embassy bombing in Nairobi, Kenya, and in Sri Lanka following the historic 2005 tsunami. At home, Dr. Tascoe provided medical attention to victims of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, as well as in 2005, the hurricane victims of Katrina in New Orleans. Today, Dr. Tascoe continues to focus on the most marginalized populations in her work as a private care physician, both here in the United States and where she practices addiction medicine and abroad, where she has made over 20 trips to the Democratic Republic of Congo. So welcome, my distinguished guests. Let's begin the conversation with a question. And that question directed basically to Frank and to Abby. Why did you do this film?
Frank, you start.
Well, one of my roommates, Zach Carter, says that I wanted to tell this story the minute we stepped out of Willard Straight Hall. And I don't know how true that is, but yeah, I had pondered it for a long time. I actually wrote a movie for Universal Pictures back in the 1980s that did not get made when they decided to only make one Black film, and it was Do the Right Thing. So kind of what am I to complain about? But anyway, so this is a story that I just have wanted to tell for such a long time, and mainly because of the people that I shared that experience with. That was so important to me. And most of us, or many of us, are still best friends today, 50 years later, because of that galvanizing experience that we shared together. The opportunity came along because when I was, I was at Santa Monica College, and a mutual friend of Abby's and I's, which Abby and I did not know one another at that time, even though we were both at Cornell at the same time, put us together after a screening of one of Abby's films and said, you guys should talk because you both want to do this story. And so we did, and 7 years later, we completed the film.
And I would say for me, you know, I was on the outside of the straight takeover. I wasn't inside. And it was a pivotal moment in my own life. And I feel like it set me on a path of the kind of work I was going to do in my career, et cetera. And I also felt like it had been sort of misrepresented in history. And so for me, I think Frank and I both shared that. It was sort of a little bit about setting the record straight, because if the only thing people knew about the takeover at Cornell was the image of people walking out with guns, which everybody just saw in the film, then it misrepresented, you know, both what the struggle was about, the fact that it ended up not being violent, the fact that guns were sort of part of a standoff, et cetera. So for me, it had been sticking in my craw since 1969 that the real story had never come out. And I thought Frank and I were really the right team to try to tell it. So that's, I think, why we embarked on it. And here's one other thing. We started thinking we were just going to tell the story of Cornell, since that's where we had both been, and that was our story. And it did not take us long to realize that nobody was going to fund just a film about Cornell. And it relates back to Cal Humanities. I thought this was going to be like a great story for Cal Humanities if we could find a California angle. And that is really what led us to the San Francisco State story, which really had not been told adequately. I mean, there've been little short pieces that had been done, but that story hadn't been told either. So we, just by combining the San Francisco State story and the Cornell story, we felt like we both had a national view of the whole thing. We were able to get some support, which was critical for us, from Cal Humanities. And here we are. And the film is better for telling both those stories, I think.
Yeah, it's true. I really find it to be a good comparison. So, and I guess for Frank and Abby, what were some of the challenges in the making of this film? Were there any?
Any? Are you kidding me? I'm going to just start with the one. There was no real footage of the event. We literally had almost nothing to work with. Thank God Frank had a friend who was taking photos of the Black students throughout the whole thing. If we hadn't had those photos, we would have been doing reenactments or I don't know what we would have been doing, animation.
Right, and there was one 16 millimeter film that was taken by somebody outside the building. And so the film of us coming out of the building, we were able to license that, and with judicious editing back and forth between the limited pictures inside the Strait and the film of us coming out, we were able to tell a decent representation of what happened at Cornell.
But that was challenge number one, was not having footage. So San Francisco State was, fabulous, because there was an amazing archive. All the news stations in San Francisco had covered what had gone on at San Francisco State. So at least the San Francisco State story had some pictures. We were really struggling. I would say that raising the money was really a big obstacle. Finding the right way to do it. But I think we were slowed down mostly by the fact that we had no money of our own to do this film with, and we just had to raise it, and it took us a long time.
Even in our the first screening that we had at the Pan African Film Festival, we got into the festival based on our rough cut. We hadn't even completed the film. And we're like, oh goodness, we're into this festival.
Now what are we gonna do?
We gotta get the rest of the money to finish this film. And as the good Lord would have it, both Abby and I had an individual angel investor that donated to the film, and we were able to complete it just
about a day before it had to be in. About one day, I'd say. Yeah. So yeah, we were that, and that speaks to the challenge for documentary films. There's nothing unique about this one. Mm-hmm. You raise a little money, you spend a little money. I mean, Frank and I never got paid. Talk about a labor of love. This film to this day is a labor of love because there wasn't enough money to pay us. So you pay all your other bills. You pay a huge amount of money to the, Sony Music and the rest of the people for the music rights. And then boom, you've got a film, but you've been donating your time the whole time. And so just for the students out there, this was a complete labor of love from both of us, because yes, we just were totally committed, to seeing this thing through. So.
Yes, and as far as money is concerned, Abby mentioned the music in the film. Music licensing for films is tremendously expensive, and but the music is a character in the film. It really helps to tell the story, and that was like critical. And so it was so important for us to raise enough money to be able to license all of those songs. And I think that's one of the really important aspects of the film, was the music of that era told the story of what that era was. And it was critical that we were able to get that.
So what message were you trying to convey to your audience with the film that was in the making and you're still trying to produce it? Did you have a clear idea what you wanted to say?
I think so. I mean, I don't think the film has got a heavy message. Ramona said something that to this day, Frank and I are sorry we didn't include in the film. Ramona at some point said to us, we've been written out of history. I mean, Frank and I, it's as if it was in the film, Ramona, because we channeled that line for the last 20 years. And so we were trying to kind of correct a historical record. Yes. Ramona was right. These stories had been written out of history, and we sort of took it upon ourselves to try to correct the historical record and to introduce you to the real people. I mean, there were very few, scholars or experts in our film, a couple of them, but very few. And this was really a story told by the participants, and that was our goal. was to let people speak for themselves about their experiences, what difference it made in their lives, why they were fighting so hard for all this. So that another generation of students, like some of those who maybe got to watch the film today, have an idea of, kind of what the struggle for ethnic studies and Black studies looked like. This is what it looked like. It wasn't like college campus. After what we showed, college campuses started to enact ethnic studies programs because nobody wanted either San Francisco State or Cornell on their campus.
Yeah.
But until what happened at San Francisco State and Cornell, everybody was just dragging their feet.
Right.
Well, Ramona, I guess, can you describe what role you played in the 1968 student strike, and did that experience impact you personally? In what way?
Roy, thank you for the question. First of all, let me thank those who assembled this gathering and the students who are listening and the faculty. Frank and Abby, you are my heroes because you put us back in history. Let me take it from there. When I was a student in high school, I didn't know who I was. I was a colored girl, a Negro girl who powdered her face so it didn't shine. I straightened my hair so it wouldn't bush too much. And I spoke the King's English. And I did all of those things because my parents were savvy enough about how to succeed in America and reach for the brass ring that they guided my family, my siblings, 5 of us, to do those things in order to succeed. So in order for us to succeed, we had to not know who we were. And if we knew who we were, we had to practice not being that. When I entered San Francisco State, I saw African Americans wearing afros, dashikis, talking about, hey, sister, hey, brother, hey, man, what's up? Black power. And it was like landing on Mars. I had gone to a private Catholic all-girls school, and I wore a pleated skirt with the white button-up blouse and a sweater, a cardigan. And so when I hadn't ended up at San Francisco State, I would say I died and went to heaven, and I lived to talk about it. And what San Francisco State Black Student Union did for me was create a pathway through which I could enter and learn that which I had suppressed and become the person that I was destined to be before society said I was unacceptable. I was the secretary of the BSU for several years. I shared that role with several of the other sisters, but ultimately became the lead secretary for the 5 years I was at State. And during the strike, I was also a member of the organization called the Presidium. Our leadership within the BSU consisted of a central committee, which was primarily the brothers. And then they made way for the sisters who were doing all the work. And we were called members of the Presidium. So we were support to the central committee, but we were also on the front lines of the strike. And I was a member of that first cadre that marched up to the anthropology department office when we selected each major department, poli-sci, social psych, biology, chemistry, and we dispatched cadres of students, 3 to 5 in each group, to go to the department office or go into the classrooms, announce that there is a strike, why there was a strike, and then say, school is out. On strike, shut it down. And in that process, I was the first student arrested. And there was a little bit of a melee that I wasn't aware was going to take place. I don't know if you can see me here. I'm saying this to you a little tongue in cheek. My brothers and sisters in my cadre had plans where they invited me to speak. I thought I had like a solo in a choir, and my job was to read the 15 demands. And as I made it to demand number 3, literally sparks began to fly and a typewriter flew out of a window. And several people broke and ran, and I delayed running because I said I hadn't done anything. And it wasn't until the anthro secretary said, honey, you need to leave, go now. I broke and I ran and I fell. I broke and I ran and I fell 3 times until I realized that plainclothes officers were perched outside the office. And I spent about 8 hours in jail. And when I did get out, I missed curfew to be home. And my greatest fear was not the police. My fear was not the jail. My fear was having my parents find out that I was a, quote, dissident. My father died never knowing. My mother found out about 3 years before she died. And she said, now, honey, that's something you could have kept to yourself. But by that time, she was 92 years old. All of which is to say, I lived my young years, young teenager, mid-teenager, late teen, early adulthood, in the thick of activism, where I cut my first teeth at San Francisco State, learning who I was, asserting who I was, and enjoying the benefits of the theme of our struggle, which was Black studies, discovering that which had been hidden or lied about, and making certain that my self-esteem grew along with that which I learned.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit, because being on the campus at the time that you were there as well, coming from the Central Valley, a very conservative community. The issues that were being discussed on campus were new to me. I wasn't sure what they meant and how it's going to impact me. But I kind of took a neutral position about the strike initially. But then when one of the protesters approached me, because they saw me that I was a reporter covering the story for the campus newspaper, and he asked me, "What are you gonna do with those skills?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm work for the New York Times, do all these things that I had visions of doing." And he said, "Those skills are important to your community. You ought to think about putting those skills in work in your community some way." And it really was heartfelt. I never thought of it in those ways, and so when I began to internalize it, I no longer became neutral to the strike, and I decided, hey, this had meaning, this had value, and what they're saying was true, that about discrimination, social injustices. And so it turned me around, and like a little light bulb, lit up in my brain, said, look, you got to be thinking about these things. And in fact, it came to a point where I even was able to get a editorial in the campus newspaper, because the editors were going to do an editorial challenging and the strike, and saying that strike was a bad thing. And so I and some colleagues in the paper said, no, we support the strike. So I was able to get the administration of the college, of the newspaper, the editors and the advisors were against it. And we fought hard, and they finally said, okay, we'll run the 2 editorials side by side. But lo and behold, after I left the college, what did I go do? Yeah, I did a stint at United Press International and Associated Press to work in the professional field. But then in August 24th, 1970, I started a neighborhood newspaper in the Mission District, which now celebrates 50 years of publishing. And so that little idea that they put in my mind flowered into being a newspaper that is respected and it covers the neighborhood, speaks to the culture and the issues of the neighborhood. And you never know when something like that happens. So personally, the strike had a great impact on me and influenced me greatly. So, and I just wanted to share that with you, because to me, it was very direct, what was the outcome of that. Frank and Abby, I want to kind of see in terms of, can you reflect on how the making of this film also impacted you personally?
Sure, but Frank, take it.
Yeah, it's, since we can only see each other, I think there may be a tendency to forget that there's students out there. And, also looking at us, it may be hard for students to think about us as young people.
Yeah.
But, we were children of the civil rights movement, I like to call it. Our parents' generation, both my mother and my father, even though I didn't grow up with my father, both my mother and my father were at the March on Washington, in 1963. We saw on television all the atrocities visited on people of color, Black folks, all across the country, and particularly in the South. And so we grew up with that. And I can't say that I had a commitment at that time. My real commitment and understanding didn't come until I got to Cornell. I grew up in a public housing project in New York City. And, it was just, scrambling to stay alive and, make it day to day with my mother raising us. But I got an opportunity to integrate a boarding school, an all-white boarding school in 1965. My best friend had become the first Black student there, and I became the second. And in that environment, I just, I don't want to sound crass about it, but I learned who white people were. I really, I grew up in a very integrated community on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But we never really called people white. There were Jewish people, there were Italian people, I was in a drum and bugle corps. We marched for everybody. And I didn't realize until I got to Cornell, really, and later in life, that we never marched for ourselves. Everybody had a holiday and everybody celebrated, and we were there celebrating for them and with them, but we never did it for ourselves. And all of that, I get to Cornell and all of that came together, and it was initiated by a letter that I received before I got to Cornell from Earl Armstrong, who was the head of the Afro-American Society, described what Black students had been facing and going through at that time, acknowledging that our group would double the number of Black students at Cornell at that time, and invited us to come to a meeting. And it was at that meeting then, kind of like discovered that there was a responsibility that we had, not just in getting good grades, but in bringing our own culture to that university and into that environment. That, the university just thought, well, we're given this opportunity, we'll assimilate. But it was critical for us that we not assimilate, but we bring our own culture and we define ourselves for ourselves. And that's what that experience did for me. And it carried forth throughout my life and everything that I've done since that time. Every job that I've had this commitment that was cemented because of my involvement at Willard Straight Hall and other things that I was involved in, because we demonstrated every year that I was at Cornell. But that's where it all came together, was on that campus up in Ithaca, New York.
And I mean, it's interesting to hear Frank talk about being a kid of the Lower East Side. I was a kid from the Upper West Side in Manhattan. I mean, that's probably something Frank and I share, even though, we had to meet long after Cornell. And I would say that the experience that I had, both, it kind of like all my protesting experience sort of melded together. So there was the support that was apparent and important for the Black students, not only the days that they took over the Straight, but it was a much longer, more complicated fight that went on for quite a while. So, there were white students in support of that the whole time. And then there was the anti-war movement, and then there was the burgeoning women's movement. So I feel like, I don't know, I felt like my job was to protest, to try to do enough to pass my courses and to put my body on the line wherever I needed to. And that's really how I spent my college years. So when I got done with college, when I graduated, I moved to California, and the question was, well, where am I going to be a radical next? And in those days, documentary filmmaking wasn't a field really. So I went to law school and became kind of a people's lawyer doing criminal defense work in San Francisco. And, did that for 10 years and learned a lot and worked hard at it. And, I don't know. So, and then, when I shifted to documentary filmmaking, here I am. But as you said, I've done 35 years worth of race and social justice films, but the intersection of race and social justice actually was part of my upbringing. Unlike Frank, I didn't go to a private school. I went to a public school, an all-girls public school in the middle of Manhattan, where white students were in the minority. And so I grew up with a lot of experience and understanding about, I had been both a majority maybe in my elementary school, but now I'm a minority in my high school. Anyway, I grew up in a very integrated world. And, somehow that infused and influenced where I ended up. And I don't think it's a mistake that it's not only not a mistake. I think, just as Frank was saying, it's been a pretty straight line for actually all four of us. We kind of cut our teeth in college and we just kept moving forward, trying to make the world a better place each day, each way that we could figure out how to do it, and And I'm interested in how Ramona kind of found the entire globe as her campus. Because I was just like one foot in front of the other, just wherever I lived. She's like taking on the rest of the world.
Well, Juan, can I just comment on that? Let me address how the experience affected me. When I was at San Francisco State, I didn't realize how wounded I was as a Negro. Once we began to learn who we were and fight to have it honored and valued in textbooks and in the classroom through education, higher education, it was like it ripped off the Band-Aid of wounds that had been suppressed over the years. And ironically, even though we won and we signed the settlement of the strike on March 21st of 1968, it was almost anticlimactic. We won, but what did we win? Most of us were ready to graduate, so we weren't sticking around to watch the evolution of the College of Ethnic Studies. But I found myself raw and never the same as I had entered, and hungry to find out what else I had missed in life, because I had spent so much time assimilating to be a good Negro and one who white folks would allow an opportunity, a great opportunity. My vision coming into San Francisco State was to major in poli-sci, go to law school, and eventually end up in the White House as the first Black female president. I shouldn't say Black female president, first Negro to be the president of the United States. And when the BSU came into my life and the strike and the issues that came forth, it was like the harvesting of a poison that I had been taking for years. I couldn't turn my back on it. I couldn't act like I didn't hear what I can't act like it wasn't relevant and critical to my existence. So when I finished San Francisco State, I did study pre-med. I studied pre-law, was accepted to Stanford Law School. But by that time, it had almost become without value to go to law school, because I didn't see where that was going to get me to the White House, nor did I see the White House as really a realistic option, because now I knew that there was a hustle going on, and I was naive about all of this. And so many Black folks, when we began to peel back the layers of institutional racism, even today, are learning what the game has always been. And it doesn't matter how much you try, the deck is stacked against your ultimate success. You may be given a little piece of success, but the ultimate success of living your dream, your vision, your contribution, being validated, being affirmed in areas of expertise, being told that you're great, knowing that you're great because someone wasn't just patronizing you as their favorite Negro or their favorite minority. All of these things have evolved over the last 50 years. My journey outside of the country and doing all of the work that I've done has been in the interest of being true to what was in here. What was in here. I rejected the conventional models to do the work that some would do, let's say, through Peace Corps. Peace Corps was a subset of the State Department. I didn't trust them. I didn't trust Peace Corps. I didn't trust the pathways that were the conventional ones to achieve opportunities. So I made opportunities for myself. And I was surprised to find that history was in agreement with me, that it was the right time for Blacks and other minorities to come forth, make a connection with one another, and realize we weren't really the minority, we were the majority of color. And that we could enter into a world and participate on levels that were unique, creative, innovative to who we were. We didn't have to mimic something that had already been written for centuries and execute somebody else's master plan. And so going to all parts of the world and daring to be present, not just as a Black person, but as a Black woman, fully empowered to take on those challenges, trusting the confidence that was embedded in me. That was really what continues to inspire me.
Mhm.
Well said, Ramona. Let me just remind attendees out there that if you want to ask questions, go to the Q&A and post the question there, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. One last question for me, and we'll open it up. We know the Agents of Change was first shown in 2016, but how does this film relate to the current political climate in this country? Is it still relevant in many ways, and how so? Frank, Abby, and Ramona, if you want to respond to that as well. Okay.
You know, the story told in Agents of Change will always be relevant, in my opinion. You know, just as I said earlier about the students saying, how could we not know about this, you know, when that happened 50 years ago, and we're going through some of the same things? How could that be happening? And I hope it doesn't take another 50 years, but it may, in terms of changes in our own country, and throughout the world, and so many other countries as well, in terms of the challenges particularly faced by people of color. And again, I would urge students that really look at your college experience holistically. Don't just think about, you know, what it takes to get a good grade in your class. The majority of the growth that I went through at college was outside of the classroom. It was my participation in extracurricular activities. Because of Willard Straight Hall, when we took over that building, it housed the student radio station. And, you know, the upperclassmen got on the radio, and they were just like in a coup d'etat. They were and say, hey, we are the, you know, the Black Liberation Front, and we've taken over this building. These are our demands. And they're like, that was cool, right? After about 20 minutes, the signal went dead. They switched to a remote transmitter. And I was like, wow, we no longer have our own voice to speak in the first person. We've got to speak through others. And that's when SDS and Abby's group Outside became really important also, to get us information in and out. When guns came into the building, you know, long distance phone service, there were no cell phones, long distance phone service was still working in the building, and we're all calling home to let our folks know that we're like, okay. And I called my mother up. My mother was crying on the phone. Oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? All the from where you came from, and now you're blowing all of this. And I'm saying, no, Ma, that's not what's happening here. My mother said, of course that's what's happening. I heard it on the news. And I said, whoa, my mother believes someone she doesn't even know over her only son because she heard it on the news. Next semester, I got my own radio show on the radio, and that became my passion in terms of being understanding how powerful that medium was. And again, this is not something I discovered in the classroom. It's something I discovered outside of the classroom and really became my passion. The idea that I could work in media and, you know, try to elicit some control over the information and the messaging, and I could do this and get paid for it, something that I love doing for free, that became my passion. So again, to the students, please understand the opportunities that are available to you outside the classroom, and that could possibly find what you would really like to commit your life to, you know, through your college experience outside of the classroom, in addition to what's happening in the classroom.
Okay, I want to share, and I'm going to share an anecdote that I think makes the film relevant. I went to hear Nicole Hannah-Jones the other night, who's on a book tour for her 1619 book project. And she was asked the question of what got you into this. And she described an early experience while in high school with a teacher, his name was Mr. Dial, and how he was teaching an ethnic studies course. And that was her aha moment about understanding that the normal history that we are all taught is so deficient, so, you know, through a white lens, so leaves out everybody else's history, the Native Americans, you know, the fact that Texas came from Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. So she was just saying, you know, that in her experience, her ethnic studies teacher, and, you know, her senior year in high school, managed to kind of blow her mind in a way that led her to creating one of the most impressive, most important, and most challenging intellectual projects about the history of race in America from, before the Mayflower. Mm-hmm. So I just felt like, and when she was saying that, I got all tingly, because what I realized was, everything that our film does and that so many of these other projects have done is to make people understand that we are really fed a bill of goods about what history is. It's not a bunch of facts and dates. And I think that ethnic studies, because a lot of it has to do with power relationships and understanding the role of race as a construct in America, et cetera, all that is critical to all of our understanding of where we fit into the historical legacy from which we come and what our obligations are to each other. How are we ever going to have a discussion of reparations in this country if we don't have a clear sense of what slavery meant and how that came to this country and how it was sustained for so many years, et cetera? So my pitch would be that, that Agents of Change is as relevant today as it was the day we made it. And I expect it'll be relevant 20 years from now, because people are always being written out of history. We scratched a tiny little bit of the surface of that. And when people say, my God, I can't believe I didn't know that. Well, there are a million other things we still don't know because no one's taught it to us. So what I hope the takeaway is from a film like Agents of Change is to have some skepticism, and that we would that the film leaves you with some skepticism about what the quote white narrative is that we've all been told since we were in second grade. Whether Frank learned it on the Lower East Side or I learned it on the West Side, it doesn't matter, because we're all being fed the same bull, as it were. Yep. And I think this film takes a step, and I think a million other films are doing the same thing. I mean, Attica, the new film on Attica, is telling the real story from the people who were there of what happened at Attica. There's a new film out on Arthur Ashe that's telling that story from a different perspective. So all I want to say is it's a shout out both to our film Agents of Change and to other films which are really making an effort to try to correct the record. And lastly, read the 1619 book, because it's amazing.
I lift up the word supremacy, white supremacy, as being something that we took charge of exposing back in 1968. And fast forward 51, 52 years, today, we're still looking at that. But the difference is that then to raise it as an issue brought about a sense of indignation. How dare you challenge us that way? Today, 50 years later, people are saying, well, it's about time. Who the hell died and called them, named them the gods, the experts, the know-it-alls? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I've been tired of this myself. People have found their voice. Young people have found their voice. Families with limited education have found their voice. The maid, the guy who pumps gas has found his voice. He knows he has purpose, and they are beginning to develop agency. I hate using these academic terms, but it applies here. Having agency over your voice, having agency over your story, having agency over your history. There was a time in my professional development, maybe 25 years ago, when I was being appointed as Dr. Tascoe to the CDC committee, to the National Institute of Health Committee, Minority Task Force. And I thought it was a great honor. But when I got there, whenever we would have our breakout sessions and talk about healthcare issues, challenges, I would always be one of the Blacks within a group of all whites, and they would pump me for the information they didn't have. And then when it was time to do the presentation to the entire collective, they would have me sit in the audience while they told what they learned from me, because my voice was not considered sufficient to tell my story. And so we see even now that our young generation is fighting up and against that. When I say we were written out of history, it's important to note at the same time that we have re-entered. And part of the beauty of this documentary is that it will forever stand in history as the evidence of when was that ground zero moment? When did the earth shift around the issue of exposing these and daring to say in education, even at a higher education level, or especially at a higher education level, we will not allow you to demean us, demoralize us, and profile us as less than you, incapable of being righteous on our own and within the authenticity of our ethnicity, our race, our gender, and that we have a voice and we can speak our story with dignity on our own. And we don't have to speak the King's English to achieve that. And so I think that that's the takeaway message. And I would hope that the students who are still with us will walk away understanding that you have received the baton. It's been passed to you. You are standing on shoulders. The fact that we were written out of history, in many ways, the current struggles post George Floyd have exposed the fact that many of our young people had no idea that there were shoulders they were standing on, because it was intentional not to maintain the momentum of what we started. But that's okay. You can't run from history when there's evidence. And Agents of Change is the evidence, along with so many other productions.